All right, here we are back for the 104th time here on The Voice of Europe. I am your host, Lucian Vâlsan, broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is Herr Jon Gunnarsson, broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer, James Huff, sitting in the background, making sure everything works just fine, broadcasting from the US. Greetings, Mr. Gunnarsson.
Good evening. Looking forward to doing the show. How about you?
I'm looking forward to doing the show. I just got home like 45 minutes ago and had a speedy eating. The only good thing is that at least I've had some very nice weather throughout the last week.
Over here it's been rather cold and sort of the beginning of winter.
Yeah, well, it is a bit cold, but still usually around 11, 12 degrees in Celsius during the day, 4 or 5 during the night, and no raining, and that's absolutely fantastic because I can tolerate -10 and I can tolerate a lot of things, but I can't tolerate rain. It kills me. It eats my soul. Implying that I have one, obviously. On my level of oppression, probably my soul has been eaten a long time ago.
Yeah. White men obviously don't have souls.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we have quite a lengthy news section, so I guess we should probably proceed.
Okay, the first one is from VOA News. First female sex pill could spur similar drugs. Most women with low sexual desire won't rush to get the first prescription drug to boost female libido. What is that word pronounced? Libido, yes. I'm always mixing it up. The female libido when it becomes available on Saturday. But they may have more options down the road. Adyi can't be taken with alcohol or certain other medications which will likely limit its use. But experts believe those restrictions could spur development of better treatments for women's sexual problems after more than a decade of neglect by most of the world's large drug makers. Kim Wallen, a psychology professor at Emory University, says Adyi represents a historic milestone that may open the door for more drugs targeting desire in men and women. Where Viagra and other men's erectile dysfunction drugs work by increasing blood flow to the genitals, Adyi acts on brain chemicals associated with desire. Quote, "This is the first time that a drug, for either men or women, has been approved strictly to increase sexual desire," Wallen said. That legitimizes many other drugs that are in development. Treatments for women's libido issues are an untapped financial opportunity for drug makers. Analysts estimate the market could be worth over $2 billion, based on academic estimates that between 5 million and 9 million US women may suffer from desire disorders. But the area hasn't been a research priority for drug makers in many years. Beginning in the 1990s, Pfizer, Bayer, and Procter & Gamble all studied, then discarded, drugs targeting female libido. Adyi itself was developed by the German conglomerate Boehringer Ingelheim, then sold to Sprout Pharmaceuticals after the Food and Drug Administration rejected the medication due to lackluster effectiveness and issues like nausea, fatigue, and dizziness. It took Sprout 4 years to win FDA approval for Adyi, which acts on brain chemicals associated with mood and appetite. The drug will come with a bold warning label about the risks of fainting if combined with alcohol or certain medications. Additionally, doctors and pharmacists must complete an online certification process to show they understand the drug's risks. Dr. Lisa Dabney says several patients have asked her about Adyi, but they generally lose interest after she explains they cannot drink alcohol while taking the daily medication. Experts generally describe Adyi's effect as modest. In company studies, women taking the drug that's also called filibenserin report a slight uptick in sexually satisfying events each month. Their answers to separate questionnaires indicated they experienced a slight increase in desire and a slight decrease in stress. Analysts from Everscore ISI estimate Adyi could generate sales of $200 million annually. That's far below the blockbuster numbers once discussed by experts, and the $1 billion that Vâlsan Pharmaceuticals recently agreed to purchase Sprout. But the buyout has revived interest. A handful of
Your internet is suck. Your internet sucks, Mr. Jon. We can't hear anything.
Sorry.
Nope, still not. Nope, nope, nope.
Okay.
Yeah, please do reset your router. Anyway, Mr. Yuan was somewhere around here. Yeah, the buyout has received interest in a handful of competitors developing alternate treatments. Those products include nasal sprays, injections, and antidepressant pills. It could be years before any of them reach patients. That's because the field of women's sexual medicine remains a small one, comprised of tiny companies with limited resources. Leading the field is Cranberry NG-based Palatin Technologies Incorporation, which is studying an injectable drug that mimics a hormone linked to sexual arousal. Unlike ADI, women would only take the drug when they want to be sexually active. The company's pen-like injector contains a single dose of bremelanotide, I think, which lasts about 8 hours. Where ADI is absorbed into the entire nervous system, Palatin drugs target a specific region of the brain. Mid-stage trial results suggest the drug could be at least as effective as ADI without the dangerous interactions with alcohol. Palatin hopes to submit its drug to the FDA in 2017 with a decision in 2018. Wall Street analysts estimate the drug, if approved, could reach sales around $500 million, according to Piper Jaffray.
Can you understand me right
yes.
now?
Okay. Yeah, it sounds significantly better.
Okay.
So
this...
Any opinions?
Yeah,
it sounds like a good news.
Definitely good news, and it's sort of surprising to me that this is the first drug of its kind, that nothing like that existed previously. That's interesting.
Now, there are some other drugs, but they exist just like Viagra exists. They have been researched and developed for an entirely different purpose, and then somewhere along the way they discovered that, oh, there is some byproduct, some secondary effect that we like also in it. But specifically to boost sexual desire, I can sort of believe that this is the first one, at least the first one to be approved, probably. I mean, even this article says that there have been previous research that eventually had been abandoned for various reasons.
Yeah, and it's notoriously hard to get FDA approval for anything.
Yeah, not to mention that getting FDA approval is in and of itself a problem, and it pretty much sounds like quite a random process. I mean, I don't know. I think I remember Milton Friedman provided a few examples of something like 20 years ago, when essentially the same medication was submitted for approval like 3 times in a row, exactly the same documentation, and the third time it got approved. And the first 2 times it was rejected for 2 different reasons that didn't make any sense. I don't know, maybe the FDA has improved over time, although I sincerely doubt about that, but if it's still the same, it's pretty random to get approval for it. This is one of the reasons why the research on Vasogel takes place mostly outside the United States, even though the judicial person that owns the rights for it is American.
Yeah, I mean, the FDA is a huge bureaucracy, and of course the problem is that if they approve a drug which then has unexpected side effects and kills people, that's really bad news for the FDA. Then they get all these negative headlines. Whereas if they fail to approve a drug that could save lives, that no one actually notices that.
Yeah.
So they tend to be too strict in what they allow.
Yeah, and as a result, they create what is called in economics invisible victims. We don't see the people who die who would not have otherwise died thanks to medication or drugs or whatever prescriptions that would have been available had the FDA been laxer or didn't exist at all. Yeah, strictly on this medicine, yeah, it sounds like a good news. If I want to be very cynical, I would say that this may create issues with frigid college women, because then what is consent? What if it was a secondary effect of this particular drug?
Yeah, I don't know if.
Sounds far-fetched now, but 5 years down the line?
Yeah, I don't really see that. I mean, if you're purposely taking this drug to increase your libido, then I mean you can't say that then you're not really consenting because this these animal feelings are created by this drug or whatever. That's nonsense. I mean,
It's
though on the
nonsense.
other hand, it's probably just as nonsensical as to say that you can't consent if you had a drink or two.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's nonsense for normal people outside of the bubble. But within the bubble, given that people have, let's be honest, men have been expelled for quote unquote rape because their partners had a beer or something, I wouldn't put this beyond the kangaroo courts of the campus tribunals. Not, I wouldn't
Uh,
put that at all.
Has it actually happened where when they've been expelled from some of these college tribunal things?
Yeah, yeah.
If there's sex with someone who really just had one beer?
It was like something like a couple of or
I
something
mean,
like
I
200
understand that.
milliliters of wine. It was a case that one I do remember clearly. I think it was at the University of Berkeley, California, Berkeley. Yeah,
Okay, but I mean, I understand that there's some feminists pushing for this idea that any drunk sex is ipso facto rape, but I don't know if that's actually the policy of any colleges.
well,
So
again, one has to look both at the policy and how it is applied, because those tribunals have, being the kangaroo courts that they are, they can sometimes decide uh, even beyond the policy. And in this particular case, with a couple of glasses of wine, like 200 or 250 milliliters of weak wine, surely it wasn't ad literam with the policy, but it was still upheld by the administration. I mean,
okay.
the tribunal adjudicated that, so therefore they must be right. And now the poor fellow is suing the university and whatnot. A long legal battle ahead.
Yeah, but still, I think applying this sort of logic to this drug, I think, would be even more far-fetched because this is a drug that you specifically take to increase libido, whereas you drink alcohol for all sorts of reasons,
True,
not just to lower your sexual inhibition. That's just one of the side effects.
true, true. All right, let's go to the Republic of Serbia on blitz.rs. This was supposed to be on the show, I think, 1 or 2 episodes ago, but due to hard drive issues, I somehow misplaced this article and I just found it. But anyway, I have updates for it. Anyway, Popović female doctors feel that they're being discriminated against. Can you imagine? Announcement that a new law about employment in government institutions, which should be put in practice on October the 12th, could retire 3,500 female doctors, caused a surge of disapproval, and its constitutionality will be decided by an appropriate court. The law is considered discriminatory, and the questioning of the law's constitutionality was requested by the public ombudsman Sasha Jankovic and the public trustee for protection of equality Brankica Jankovic. They requested that, until a final verdict is reached, the Constitutional Court should veto on any individual act that could be put into place based on the questionable article of this law that could terminate women's employment. Regional Doctors Association of Belgrade is rooting for selective retiring of female doctors, about 3,500 of them, because they meet the age requirement for being 60 years and 6 months old, according to the law that will be put into practice. Olga Popović, the president of said association, has stated that female doctors feel discriminated compared to their male colleagues. Popović considers that such selective approach to retirement should be applied where possible and according to workflow. Directors of facilities who are very responsible were asked not to let the retiring of female doctors to lower the quality of services that would primarily negatively affect the patient. There is an idea to make a transitional period in facilities facing a lack of doctors of certain professions so as to not endanger the workflow, Popović stated. She stated that selected retirement would, where necessary, be implemented in the following 6 months or up to 1 year. According to her, once the law is implemented, directors of facilities who need to organize work would suffer from a shortage of doctors. The biggest problem is pediatrics, she states. Popović believes that things won't be rapidly changed in October the 12th, but gradually over a period of several months of retiring old and employing new staff. Another organization opposing the forcible retirement is Lekarke, that is the Serbia's Doctors Association, that suggested to ministers that women doctors should be excluded from these measurements, warning that certain sectors of health system are already lacking highly trained staff who are moving abroad. Lekarke supports the rationalization of public employment and suggests an analysis of the entire structure of doctors in Serbia as soon as possible, and then, in accordance with the law, signing contracts that would give female colleagues who have already met the requirements for retirement a chance to continue working. Now, a few notes in here. Over two-thirds, between 65 and 70% of medical staff in Serbia is female, and women make up the majority of medical students. On the other hand, the lack of specialized staff that exists now is a problem created by a short-sighted ban on voluntary specialization of doctors that was enacted around 25 years ago. I'm not sure if it's still in place now, but there was a time in Serbia when once you go to the medical school, to the medical university, from one point on, you're not allowed to choose your own specialization. You would have to choose only certain specializations according to what the state said that it was needed. I'm pretty much sure that's not happening now, but it happened in the past, and now the chickens have come home to roost. Now there's an update on this story, because this story is almost 2 weeks old, or probably even more than that. One of the leading doctors in Serbia, Dr. Mirjana Stojicic, she threatened to get a sex change to keep her job until she's 65, and apparently that was enough to get the government to back down. Another something that I should probably mention, in Serbia, just like in most of other European countries where there is a difference between women's retirement age and men's retirement age, the law says that women can retire at the age of 60 and 6 months, but it's not strictly enforced, as opposed to men who cannot choose to retire at the age of 60 and 6 months. They have to work until 65, but women can choose to retire whenever they wish within this period between their 60 and 65. The source that keeps providing me news from Serbia says, well, essentially the gist of the story is that the gals won their choice and men are not complaining, as always.
So I'm confused. Why does this woman doctor threaten the government with getting a sex change if she's just allowed to continue working as a woman?
Well, now she is, but the government said, look, we have too many old people within our state system. Now, obviously I wouldn't, probably you wouldn't if you were the Minister of Health either, but the solution of the government was, well, we have to get rid of some of the very old staff because they're not performing so well or whatnot, or we have too many youngsters who are waiting to become doctors and whatnot. It doesn't matter what the reason was. We have to get rid of some of them. And they were, oh, look, we have a law that we don't usually enforce, but we could enforce it in the state institutions, at least sometimes, when in case of need, such as this case. So essentially they said, look, you have to look on doing something to get rid of some of the old staff. And that's where the whole thing started. And, the original proposal was, well, we're going to do it gradually over a year or something like that. But apparently that's still too much. According to some old women doctors who simply want to work a bit more and whatnot. It all boils down to this mentality that they have a right to a job or something.
Okay, so basically these women are sort of forced to retire or you're fired, that sort of deal.
Yeah, well, you can't actually be fired. They're forced to retire. Being fired from a state system in Serbia is quite complicated, to put it mildly. They have an almost identical system with the French system when it comes to bureaucracies. It's very, very hard to fire someone unless you can accuse them of malpractice or something. It's very, very hard to fire them. So
Okay.
essentially, they threw a temper tantrum. That's what I'm saying here. They threw a temper tantrum.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is sort of the downside of having this lower retirement age that
Hmm. It's
yeah,
not
I
just.
never
Go ahead, please.
and I guess none of these women were before complaining that the retirement age was too low for women or
There you go. Yep, absolutely. And in the one case, and I think this is pretty much the one case in the last 20 years when the state actually considered, let's try to enforce this in this particular institution only this time because there is really a need. Whether that real need is actually real or not, I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But just one time they tried to enforce the law, and now they didn't like it. However, given that the generalized status is that women get to choose and men don't, that's okay. No one complains about it.
yeah, because it's just it just is a sort of a small way of countering all the prevalent discrimination that women face in society every day, and you know after all they are paid X% less and so on, so that's only fair.
Yeah, the thing is that in healthcare, it's actually funny, but because all of these pro women policies now, one by one, they start to backfire. Precisely because it's a female dominated field. So whether you like it or not, most of the victims of these policies will be women.
Yeah, I mean that's it's often the case when you have this sort of policies favoring a particular group. There's bad effects of that. Um, whether you pretty much whenever you give one group this particular right, this also comes at a cost, even if that's not always very visible. It's that if, for example, if
Mhm.
you look at affirmative action, then it means that people will trust you less, and they will. If you're one of these favorite groups, um, then people will assume that you're less competent than someone who got in under tougher conditions and so on. There's always these sorts of trade-offs there,
Yeah, and these
which
perverse costs are entirely chosen, obviously not by the individuals themselves, but by the policymakers. Whether they intended to choose them or not, that's a different story. Most likely not. But yeah, it's self-inflicted in a way.
yeah, and it's always amazing whenever there's some sort of inequality that sort of mostly that is mostly bad for men. It's also some minor aspect that's bad for women. Then people always focus on the second one, even though it's much more minor.
Hmm. Yeah, pretty much. And let's not forget, in countries like Serbia or Slovenia or and whatnot, doctors are usually quite privileged in terms of the income they make and the pensions they get. So, I mean, it's one of the most privileged categories in society. And now they complain that, oh my God, I have to choose to retire 2 years earlier or 3 years earlier in a very big pension that most people won't ever get. Can you imagine the oppression?
Yeah, obviously these women did not check their privilege beforehand.
Yeah, very bizarre, but I found it very funny because these stories are going to become more frequent in all the countries of Europe that have these uh, unbalanced pension systems. And when I say unbalanced, I'm not meaning just the disparity in age retirement, but also financially quite unsolvent. Some cuts will have to be one way or the other, sooner or later, we're gonna have to be applied, and you should see the flow in there. When that will happen, I'm pretty sure someone will make the calculations that women will be affected the most somehow.
Yeah, I mean, most of these kinds of state retirement systems are more or less insolvent. They
Yes.
because of the demographic developments, it's going to be harder and harder to keep up these kinds of payments. So you have to make cuts somewhere, and increasing the retirement age of women up to that of men is sort of an obvious candidate for that. As for example, they're doing in Austria, where they're doing that sort of very slowly and gradually, but at least they're doing it eventually.
Yeah, same here. They want to try to. I increased it finally to 63, and it's supposed to end up to 65, something like another 15 years from now, or something like that. Yeah, it is, but at the current rates, I think only Norway, Germany, and probably Britain, but not all of Britain, only some portions of Britain have have solvent pension system. Everyone else is gonna have to face this problem sooner or later.
I mean, Germany is currently in the process of increasing the retirement age from 65 to 67.
Mm-hmm.
Just it's to keep it solvent for at least a while longer.
Yeah, probably for another generation, but then what? Yeah, the whole state pension system is an entire clusterfuck, and people keep on forgetting that when Bismarck designed it, it was meant to be available only for like what, a third of the population, probably even less, because most people wouldn't reach the retirement age.
Yeah, I mean back then the retirement age was higher than the life expectancy.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, so only a third or less of the people actually reached that age. Anyway, speaking of Germany, please go ahead.
Okay, this one is from the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. The neglected sex. Gender mainstreaming is affirmative action for women under a new name, the critics of governmental equalization policies argue. More and more men no longer want to take this lying down. A new men's movement is being formed in Germany. Gender mainstreaming has acquired a bad reputation. While more and more women are having doubts whether the strategy with the untranslatable name has yielded them any benefits, men are increasingly criticizing the way it's applied, as a procedure aimed at eliminating discrimination against women, not at establishing equality between the sexes. Quote, gender mainstreaming is affirmative action for women under a new name. The interests of men are systematically neglected, says Andreas Krauser, who chairs Mandat and runs a men's rights website. One look at the federal equality law supports this suspicion. Quote, according to this law, women are supported in order to alleviate existing disadvantages. Article 1 says about the equalization of women and men in the federal bureaucracy and in federal courts. Article 16 concerns the election of equality commissioners. Quote, the equality commissioner and her second are elected from the female employees by the female employees. Only women are allowed to fight for equality. Skipping a bit here. To many men, it is obvious that gender politics isn't going to do them any good, and they are no longer prepared to suffer in silence. Instead, there's an increasing number of associations, self-help groups, blogs, and websites in which they ask themselves, what does this measure, that policy, mean for me as a man, father, husband, patient, or employee? Is it in my best interest? What is my best interest anyway? Quote, there are several organizations operating on a nationwide level, addressing important topics such as family life and family law. There's a fathers' rights movement with many regional subgroups, support for male victims of domestic and sexual violence, lawyers advocating for children's rights, and now also approaches focusing on education policies targeting the problems of boys in schools, says Arne Hoffmann, a publicist who is seen as a leading thinker of the men's rights movement and who runs a blog called Genderama. He says that it is often the experience of having your children taken away from you after a divorce that gets men to take up this work. Part of that work is fundamentally societal questions, a center for taking stock of the political situation of men is the University of Düsseldorf, where every 2 years the psychotherapist and neurologist Matthias Franz holds an international interdisciplinary men's congress with many challenging speakers. The description of the situation alone is frightening. Men have a lower life expectancy than women. They make up for 75% of all suicides. Among teenage boys, that number is up to 86%. Men are more likely to suffer from alcoholism and other addictions. They are more likely to be obese and to have heart diseases and depression. Men are more likely to be unemployed or to be in precarious employment situations. They are almost 1.5 times as likely to be victims of violence, also committed by female perpetrators, are falling behind in education, and are more likely to be homeless. Men only get custody of their children in about 30% of disputed cases, and when the mother of their child gives birth anonymously or gives away the child anonymously, they have no option of asserting their paternal rights. And the article goes on much longer. I've cut very liberally from it because it is it's basically sort of a basic overview of men's issues and the men's rights movement in Germany. Most of it, of course, is stuff that is going to be familiar to listeners of this show. Mm-hmm. But I picked this article because it's a really good news to see this kind of article in a newspaper like Die Faz, which is one of the biggest and most prestigious newspapers in Germany. So this is definitely a very good piece of news, and it's also a sort of a very positive article. It's sort of very very factual. It's not necessarily biased in favor of the men's rights movement, but it sort of presents it in sort of a neutral, way. The sort of way it's that journalists are, it's basically the way that journalists are supposed to act, as opposed to write. Just it presents these sorts of problems. What sort of organizations have arisen to tackling that, and I think it's a really nice article, and I'm really glad that this was printed.
Yeah, it's not yellow journalism for starters, which is fabulous. I guess to put it into a context of magnitude, thinking of this article being published on the New York Times in the U.S. or probably printed, I don't know. In Britain is a bit of a problem because their mainstream is very clear about partisanship. I don't know, being printed in the BBC, maybe that would be a bit too much.
Yeah, maybe something like that. It's not, of course, not a state-owned newspaper, but yes, something like that.
And because in Britain it's always this problem. I mean, yeah, the Guardian is mainstream, but we all know that they're far-left hacks. The Telegraph, aka the Tory Graph, and then there's the Daily Mail, which is, well, the Daily Mail is.
Yeah, I mean the FATS is sort of in prestige comparable to the Guardian, but it's not openly partisan or anything like that. It's sort of slightly left-leaning, but it's not not particularly biased.
I see. Yeah, it is a good thing. I mean, I would probably. I mean, I was thinking to titling this show at first "Mainstream Anti-Feminism," but then I reconsidered that because I had to cut some of the news that would have alluded more to this. But generally, things are getting a bit more mainstream. I mean, it's a lot more mainstream today to at least be non-feminist, not necessarily anti-feminist, but at least to start viewing things in the mainstream outside of the feminist ideology.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. This article is not anti-feminist. It's maybe non-feminist, not, but it's that's maybe the one thing I would criticize about this article, that it does not really talk about feminism. It's just sort of what it sort of seems to imply that is maybe something that we need to extend these sorts of policies and these sorts of support provided to women. We need to expand that to men too. That's maybe that's something we need is something like a sort of feminism for men is sort of a counterweight to the traditional feminist movement, which of course I think that's strong. I think we just need to do away with feminism, and
Yes.
we don't need to replace it or balance it with some sort of male version of feminism.
Yeah, yeah, two wrongs don't make it right. And yeah, it does seem to allude to this kind of thing. But on the other hand, remembering from other articles that you brought in this show from the German press, it seems to be that for now this is the tone whenever they don't rant about male privilege or whatnot. This seems to be the tone, the most moderate tone for now available in the mainstream German language press.
Yeah, this is probably the best we're going to get
for now. Mr. Jon, have you lost connection again?
Yeah.
Okay. Then I guess I can move on since you lost connection, or at least it's unstable.
At least I can still hear you fine.
Yeah. Now it's better. You just cut off for a little bit.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Do we have some hope to see this tone evolve even a bit more than what it is now? I'm asking you because you definitely know the German culture better than I do.
Yeah, I don't know. It's still, the media in Germany is still sort of largely pro-feminist and so on. But I guess there's definitely the sort of growing opposition of people being either openly opposed to feminism or at least kind of non-feminist, as this article is. So that's definitely a growing thing. But sort of the mainstream opinion among journalists, who are of course a very particular class of people, is still very much in favor of feminism. But things are improving.
Yeah, I do expect that the journalists to be the last ones to change their mind, because the media usually follows the culture and not the other way around. Although sometimes it happens the other way around. I think you also told me that among the journalists there's the highest proportion of voters for the Green Party. So that pretty much tells me what I need to know about how representative is the mainstream opinion of journalists in comparison with the rest of the society.
Yeah, and I mean, and even journalists writing for more sort of conservative-leaning newspapers are still quite often voting for the Greens.
Yeah, I'm not surprised at all. I'm not surprised at all. I mean, being a poshy hipster is, I guess, something that still pays dividends, at least social dividends, definitely not financial ones. Okay. Let's go further into Norway. A teenage girl accused her boyfriend of rape. On May 31 this year, an underage girl went to the police and told them that she had been raped. She alleged that the incident happened indoors at an address in Nordhordland. The girl's boyfriend was subsequently arrested. Shortly after, the police contacted the girl again to get further details. At that moment, she explained that she had lied and that it was not true at all that she had been raped. The reason she gave for filing the allegation was that she was upset over something else that her boyfriend had done. The girl is now charged with filing false accusations and is likely to be given a 120 days in jail, most likely a suspended sentence. She did not think about the consequences of what she did and does deeply regret the deed in retrospect, says the girl's defender, Miss Kelle Fløystad, to Bergens Avisen. The man who was arrested in the case is a few years older than the teenage girl. He does not want the girl to be punished for this, adds Kelle Fløystad. On October the 12th this year, the matter should have been taken up in court, but the police was unable to track down the girl. We did not get to sue her, confirms Asper Otterheim, the police prosecutor in Hordaland Police District. Beyond that, we will not comment any further on this matter, he added. Bergens Avisen, investigators have found out that the girl no longer lives in Hordaland. Now, the reason I brought up this one is because this would be the fifth false rape allegation fully confirmed in the same tiny geographical area since Voice of Europe exists, that would be in the last, what, 18, 19 months since we've been doing this? Actually, even more than that. What's interesting is that now that she fled the prosecution, the 120-day sentence is most likely off the table now, given that, fleeing prosecution comes with further punishment. I don't know. I'm just glad that these cases are being taken seriously, because sooner or later someone is going to centralize these news reports, and if this trend continues, maybe 10 years from now, probably even earlier than that, we're going to have the opportunity to have a more serious discussion about the phenomenon of false rape allegations.
Yeah, and it's I don't know, maybe it's just the language barrier, but this article seems like very nonchalant, that she couldn't be found, and she's fled and so on. It's as if that's just sort of a normal occurrence, that every day she's supposed to appear in court and she's not there. And
yeah, yes and no. I mean, it's not a normal occurrence, that's for sure. But on the other hand, the Scandinavian legal systems are a little bit more relaxed on enforcing strict court dates and whatnot. I mean, for instance, in Denmark, if it is a very low crime, such as, I don't know, petty theft or tax fraud of very tiny amounts, or even this, I mean, a false rape allegation isn't considered a god-tier type of crime. Sometimes there are even these kinds of situations. For instance, you're handed a 2 months jail sentence, but you'll start you're supposed to go to jail, like, I don't know, 4 months from now or something like that.
Okay.
And you're supposed to just come in voluntarily and execute the sentence. They're a little bit more liberal on this, so that's why probably the police doesn't seem extremely concerned. On the other hand, the chief of the police says, well, we cannot comment any further, so they're probably now establishing where the hell did she move.
Okay.
So yeah, that's why they're not extremely concerned. On the other hand, since the police is supposed to find her and take her to court as opposed to enforcing an already handed down sentence, this will probably lead to a much harsher sentence than a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, that's probably the case.
And given that it's an area of low violence, I mean, the Bergen area is probably the most peaceful place in Europe, or probably even in the world, although I think the villages in Iceland would probably be a good competitor. It's a very, very peaceful place. So 5 confirmed by the press false rape allegations in 2 years, that's quite a lot for a very, very low violence area.
You happen to know how many people live in that area?
Not precise. I would presume somewhere around 400,000, but I can't state for sure. Let me see. Yeah, I was right. The Greater Bergen region, 414,000. There you go. I'm a prophet.
Okay. Not bad.
Yeah, well, I'm a good guesstimate when it comes to populations in Scandinavian nations for obvious reasons. I've studied them quite a lot. But yeah, so 414,000. That's slightly smaller than the city I live in when the students come in. So it's quite a big area.
Yeah. Of course, if there's 5 reports that are reported by the police and confirmed, then there's probably many more that's where you either don't know whether it's a false accusation or maybe cases that the media just isn't reporting or whatever.
Yeah, and given that the actual rape rate in the area is so minuscule that you have to look very, very deep into long PDFs on multi-annual reports to actually find the exact rate in the area. I mean, I haven't run the numbers, but I would not be surprised if we put in only these 5 and look at the last 2 years crime rate. That these 5 could actually turn out to be more than actual confirmed rapes.
Yep.
Anyway, I mean, essentially, should just highlight a trend that, let's face it, it started in the Norwegian justice system somewhere around 2011, and I started reporting on it on 2012, 2013. This trend of actually going to after the false accusers. This wasn't the case at all in Scandinavia just 5 years ago, and now it becomes the common theme in Norway. And believe it or not, they're successfully exporting bits of their model into Sweden. And that's absolutely fabulous. Because
That's excellent news.
Yeah, and they definitely need it in Sweden, where they record one incident like 50 times because potato or something. Which pretty much makes them have a bad image, because the official stats, if you take them at face value, it appears that Sweden is only marginally better than Lesotho in terms of sexual violence. And I'm like, come on, you can't actually believe that. Anyway, moving forward on the Telegraph.
Let's go to the silly place again.
Oh, crap, yeah, it's the silly place. The sexist words your children are no longer allowed to use at school. Jesus Christ, yeah, it's that bad. Children as young as 5 are going to be admonished for using language that enforces gender stereotypes, as new guidelines are sent to every school in England this Tuesday. School students are no longer allowed to use sexist language to bait each other in the playground, such as "man up" or "go make me a sandwich," and head teachers are being urged to ensure that sexist language is taken as seriously as racist language. These guidelines come from a report by the Institute of Physics. In response, some schools are creating volunteer squad of girls to police sexist attitudes and report back to the teachers. Schools are also being asked by the report to appoint senior teachers as gender champions, appointing them with the task of encouraging more girls to take traditionally male subjects such as economics, computer science, and physics at GCSE level and A level, and more boys to take female subjects such as English literature, foreign language, and psychology. Stereotypes are blamed for the fact that there is a gender divide in the subjects taken at GCSE and A level. Only 19% of girls who scored an A star in GCSE physics studied it at A level in 2011. This contrasts to the amount of boys, just under half of whom scored an A star in physics, studied it at A level in the same year. Boys are twice as likely to study mathematics, 3 times as likely to study further mathematics, and more than 4 times as likely to take A-level physics. The stereotypes hold true with the female subjects as well. Twice as many girls studied English A-level as boys in 2014, whilst 70% of psychology A-level students were women. Claire Thompson of the Institute of Physics, who helped draw up the guidelines, told the Sunday Times, "Even low-level comments are potentially an issue with teachers using phrases such as man up." Well, fuck you! Anyway, the subject choice gender divide has been partially blamed for the pay gap, women currently earning 19% less per hour than men, as the female subjects are often thought of as soft subjects and tend to lead to lower paid careers. Research funded by the Department of Education in 10 schools found that where there was a pattern of girls choosing female GCSE subjects, there was often also a wider culture of sexist attitudes and language. An assessment of the pay gap is being led by Nikki Morgan, the Education Secretary, who is also the Minister for Women and Equalities, or maybe the Minister for White People and Anti-Racism. Anyway, these new gender policies have been piloted in a selection of schools already before being rolled out across the country. Rolled out, I think. The editors of the Telegraph are probably on vacation. Janice Callow, deputy head of one of the pilot schools, Fairfields High School in Bristol, told Sunday Times, quote, "We have always had clear policies on racist language, but now we're making it clear to staff that any kind of sexist language is not acceptable," she said. "We used to say man up, cupcake, and we've stopped doing that. Saying don't be a girl to a boy if they are being a bit wet is also unacceptable. Language is a very powerful tool. You have to be so conscious of what you're saying to children," end of quote. And it has there, at a glance, a list of things that are going to be banned. So according to this, man up being said to people who are acting a bit wet, calling boys sissies, calling children calling each other cupcake, boys telling girls to make them a sandwich, teachers saying to boys don't be a girl, and calling girls who study male subjects lesbians. Apparently that's very oppressive. And there's also a poll in there in which 17,175 people voted on the question of whether this thing is okay or not. I voted no, and 74% of those who voted agreed with me that this thing is fucking retarded.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say.
It's that kind of news where you don't even, you know? I mean, seriously? This part that bothered me the most. In response, some schools are creating volunteer squads of girls to police sexist attitudes, because relying on the words of children has served civilization very well, such as the witch trials or during the Soviet Union. And of course, we all know that only girls can readily police sexist attitudes in everyone else, right? We all know that. It's an established fact.
Yeah, obviously sexism just means being mean to girls.
Mm-hmm. And you know, I'm not buying this whole thing that every word can be a problem, and even low-level comments are potentially an issue. And really?
Okay, I mean potentially, if by potentially you mean almost certainly not, then okay, but
yeah, you can always potentially.
Lots of things could happen potentially. I mean,
yeah, you can always potentially be hit by lightning in the middle of the street. The likelihood of ever happening that into your life is essentially zero, but whatever, it's potentially.
Yeah, and I mean this kind of thing doesn't rely on any evidence or anything. It's not like they've done some particularly clever study where they teased out the effects of using this quote-unquote sexist language on people. No, it's just pure conjecture.
Yeah, and you know, it's not only that, but it's this thing that everyone should be thin-skinned and should, heaven forbid, suffer any sort of annoyance from someone else. And you know, I was showing this article to a professor, and you know, she told me that whoever wrote this garbage has clearly never worked with children. I mean, children tend to be very politically incorrect and mean with each other at the age of 5 or 6 or 7, and even way into teenage years. Children are politically incorrect with each other.
May I throw in on this?
Please do.
The way they're having children essentially police other children. That's my understanding, right? That's what they're doing?
Yes.
Yeah, it takes me back to 1984's
Absolutely.
Ingsoc with the the Junior Anti-Sex League.
Yes.
So basically now the Junior Anti-Sexist League.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, maybe I should design a new logo for that. It's already available, the Junior Anti-Sex League logo, so I'll just have to add AIST. But yeah, in all seriousness, this thing is wrong on so many levels. I don't know, I mean, it should be obvious to any sane person why this is wrong.
Yeah, what always really bothers me about this is just this this assumption that conforming to gender stereotypes is bad.
Yes.
I mean, it would be bad to force people to conform to gender stereotypes. I agree with that completely. But you know, if people choose to conform to gender stereotypes, what is wrong with that? Why is it a bad outcome if you know boys predominantly study math and economics and girls prefer to study languages? Why is it a bad thing?
Yeah, and more importantly, who the hell is the school to dictate these kinds of things? I mean, I don't know, call me old-fashioned, but you know, even in Britain just 20 years ago, the school was there to teach them to read. I mean, they say here that it starts applying for 5-year-olds. So, you're supposed to teach them basic words and things of that nature. You're not supposed to teach them gender ideology, essentially, because that's what it is. It's an ideology.
Yeah, but I mean, your schools have always been teaching some sort of ideology. That's
Yeah, but they were less overt about it, and most of the curricula was not ideological. I do agree with you that schools have always taught some sort of ideology. That's absolutely true.
I mean, I think that's one of the primary purposes of having public schools or state schools. Because I mean, even if you're worried about providing education for everyone, I mean, the government is also worried about providing food for destitute people, but they don't grow food in government farms and then hand out food to everyone.
Yeah.
No, I mean they just give poor people money, and if providing poor people with education were all this public schooling were about, they would just give people money or vouchers and then just have private schools providing that. But having this sort of uniform school system where you can indoctrinate people and give them sort of unifying ideology that keeps the nation together and everyone sort of on a common denominator, that is definitely a big boon if you're the government. You want to extend your reach over people's minds.
Yeah, and that's what it was designed for at first in Prussia. Back in the days, it was designed precisely for this purpose, to teach ideology and teach, keep the nation together and whatnot.
And I can remember this one episode from my own school days, where we had some sort of school excursion to a museum of schools as they used to be in the old days, and then there we were told, back then they instituted these schools and they taught them the values of nationalism and respecting the Kaiser and so on, and it's really bad. And back in those days we had these evil schools that teaching these evil values, and back then I never realized that this is exactly what's happening now, except the ideology that's being taught is a different one.
It's slightly different, yeah, not significantly different. I mean, in terms of totalitarianism, I find it very hard to find substantive differences. In terms of outcomes, yeah, obviously there are some differences, but I mean, I don't know. I guess one way or the other, you're always going to have ideology in education, but when it's on a voucher type of system, at least you're going to have some competition between them. Because you always have the religious schools, the secular schools, the whatever schools.
And you get some diversity.
Yeah, you get some actual diversity. Who would have thought? But then again, I guess diversity is a strength only in the terms of how you look, but not necessarily how you think.
Yep.
What a surprise.
Also,
okay.
one more stupidity I want to address this. That the subject choice gender divide has been partially blamed for the pay gap, women currently, and blah blah blah. As
there is no pay gap.
Female subjects are often thought of as soft subjects and tend to lead to lower paid careers. No. I mean, yes. I mean, they are thought of as softer, but there's no causation there. It's not like an employer says, "Aha, he has studied a hard subject. Therefore, I'm going to pay him a lot, and she's studied some soft science, therefore I'm going to pay her a lower amount." No, I mean that's not how it works. It's a question of supply and demand of the marginal productivity of people of what they can contribute to a company. I mean.
The fact that they're considered soft has no bearing on the outcome of the paycheck of the graduate. And there are people who have some sort of STEM qualification that make less than, I don't know, let's say a militant feminist on Harvard, for instance. I mean, just because it's a soft science, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to lead to a very low pay, or just because it's a hard science, it's going to lead to a very high pay. It's just, I mean, I guess even the tiniest market thinking is just completely missing from those who wrote this report.
I mean, for example, economics is sort of a fairly soft science, but still
Yes.
economists make fairly good salaries and so on, and they're fairly in demand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, I don't know how to put it, but it's not enough to study just pure mathematics, because there is not such a huge demand for mathematicians. It's demand for applied mathematics. So you always have to have something besides that.
Yeah. Also, it's sort of the signaling value of being able to have a degree in mathematics means that you're really smart and able to use abstract reasoning and so on, which is valuable in many jobs. And just sort of knowing that someone is trained as a mathematician, that tells you as an employer that this is someone who can quickly acquire new skills, and that is also an important reason why mathematicians earn high salaries.
Yeah, and then again, it's not true in all cases. I'm not even convinced it's true in most cases. I mean, I've had the privilege to meet a few people who were, yes, because they're dead, some of them now, who were world-renowned geniuses in mathematics, but they were very weird as people. They were surviving on stipends from the Society of International Mathematicians or something like that, because they couldn't keep a job for too long, because they were socially awkward. So, I mean, these kinds of things, these kinds of nuances always escape when these kinds of broad analyses are being put forth in the press.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of reminds me of Ramanujan, who was this Indian mathematician who was extremely brilliant, but he's also like very weird, and he was like not interested in doing anything outside of mathematics, and he had a rather short and on the whole poor life, even though he was one of the most brilliant mathematicians. Whereas and mathematics is sort of the quintessential hard science, and he was this guy who was brilliant at doing this really hard stuff, but still, in sort of career terms, he was not all that successful.
Yep. So yeah, I mean, and again, mathematics is a field with a lot of very eccentric men. That's why I'm not convinced that just having a degree in mathematics is enough to hold the keys for a high-paid career. It's not usually the case. Maybe it is the case in Britain. Maybe Britain is a special case. I don't know. I can concede that, but. And as you said at the beginning of the analysis of this article, what's so wrong about conforming to quote-unquote gender stereotypes? Gosh, I fucking hate that terminology, but whatever. What's so wrong about it?
Yeah, I mean, this is what really is really starting to annoy me, that this is always just implicitly assumed to be bad, but it's never actually argued for.
Yeah. In the chat room says, NetGod says that I should start saying don't be a boy to females who act aggressive and obnoxious. Another J, well, if banning cupcake doesn't work, they'll just find more words to ban while they vainly search for the magic bullet to solve all the problems. And then Mr. R, I'm going to avoid trying to pronounce that Finnish name, cites a little song from a little children's song. What are little boys made of? What are little boys made of? Snips and nails and puppy dogs' tails. That's what little boys are made of. What are little girls made of? Sugar and spice and everything nice. I guess this would be banned by these guidelines, wouldn't it?
Yeah, presumably. It's also that the word cupcake specifically is banned. It's like such an innocuous term. It's like, I don't know, if they banned the word cunt or something, I could maybe see that, but it's not as offensive in Britain as it is in the US, but still. But
and it's not offensive at all in Australia. I mean,
yeah.
Friends call themselves each other cunt. The problem with English is that being a very anarchic language, it's very hard to ban words because they can mean whatever the fuck they want in many cases. On the other hand, thinking in British terms, do you remember how triggered the mainstream women's activists were when Milo Yiannopoulos called them darling? So, if that is the standard, then cupcake is.
Oh my God, he called them the D word.
Yeah, I mean, if that is the standard, then definitely cupcake is the uber offensive thing to say. Jesus Christ. Okay, sticking in Britain and going again with the uber exception.
Okay, this one is from The Sun. Schoolboy's let's get naughty lies ruined my life. An innocent mom of 2 has told how a schoolboy's sex lies ruined her life. Karen Selden, 44, was accused of sending the lad, 15, a message saying, "Let's get naughty," and bedding him. She slammed cops for acting on the boy's word in taking her to court without a shred of evidence. Claret Karen of Abercarn, Philly, however that's pronounced, said, "They are the real criminals." Karen's local community turned against her on the back of the lad's lies. She became a prisoner in her own home as she was called a kiddie fiddler and a pedophile. Eggs were thrown at the window, her car was damaged, and she was even attacked in her home. She also lost her job as the stress of the nightmare took its toll. And now, despite being cleared by a jury who concluded the case against her was based on a pack of lies, she is still suffering. Karen said, "I was completely innocent, but the people who need to be questioned are the ones who brought this case to trial. As far as I'm concerned, they are the real criminals. I faced the real prospect of going to jail for something I did not do. The police charged me with not one shred of evidence apart from this boy's word. Even though I've been cleared in court, I live with the stigma and daily abuse from people who still believe the terrible lies. This case has cost me my job and my confidence and wasted thousands of taxpayers' pounds. The boy who complained about me is a total fantasist and should never have been taken so seriously without any evidence at all." Karen was accused of sex with the boy after allegedly sending him a message saying, "Let's get naughty," and photos of her boobs and bum. Her ordeal started in March last year when the lad, who cannot be named for legal reasons, sent Karen a friend request on Facebook. As she vaguely knew him and had met him before, she accepted. Karen, who has 2 daughters, Katie, 24, and Amy, 16, said, "He looked like a typical teenager, skinny, tall, wearing a hoodie. I didn't really take much notice of him." 2 months later, police called at her home in Abercarn, South Wales. She recalled, "They told me the boy's mother had made a complaint about me. I couldn't believe my ears. They searched my phone and Facebook to see the pictures I had supposedly sent him. They didn't find any, as I had not sent them. I couldn't understand why such lies were being made up. I was very upset and angry. A few nights later, I logged into Facebook and had a message from a close friend who said vicious rumors were being spread about me, saying I'd slept with a boy. She told me to look on the profiles of a couple of people. I was horrified that there were vile messages about me saying, 'She is disgusting,' and 'If it was my son, I would give her a good battering.' The hate campaign then escalated. Karen said, 'People would bang on my door late at night and run away. I was called a kiddie fiddler and a pedophile. One night last September, I was at home when there was a knock. I opened the door and it was forcibly pushed open. I fell backwards, lost my footing, and I heard shouting. I was being kicked and dragged by my hair. I was screaming. I was dragged over a table with an ashtray and wine glass on it. There was a female standing over the top of me. She said I was a bitch and a bad mother. I stood up and said, I'm calling the police. I was grabbed and someone pushed me back and put his knee on me and his hand on my throat. My phone was taken. I was terrified. A neighbor who heard the commotion phoned the police, but the cops arrested Karen and searched her home. She said, it was surreal. This boy's mother had claimed he was at my house with just his boxers on. I realized I was dealing with people on another level. I had no idea what their motive was to tell such lies. How can one mother do that to another? I later discovered the police were looking for this boy's T-shirt. The boy's mother was later given a caution for the assault. But Karen spent that night in a police cell and was charged with sexual activity with a minor and had to pose for mugshots and provide fingerprints. Karen added, I was told it might be easier to plead guilty, as, rather than face up to 4 years jail, I'd just go in the sex offenders register. But I was never going to plead guilty to something I hadn't done. I had to believe the jury would see the truth through all its lies. She had to wait 12 months for her trial. Bail conditions meant she had to stay at her home. Karen denied 4 charges of sexual activity with a minor, and on October 2nd, after a week-long trial and 3 hours of deliberations, the jury cleared her on all counts. Karen, who is now unemployed, said, I had to leave a job I loved because I kept making mistakes with all the stress. I couldn't concentrate. What happened to me is terrifying because it could happen to anyone. I believe this boy had a vendetta against my family.
Well, interesting.
So this sounds all very terrible. Do we have to take into account that this is the son and not necessarily a very trustworthy source? But probably at least the broad outlines of this story are true. Whether we of course don't know for certain that these accusations are false, but they seem to be.
Yeah, I see that the story is being reported in the Mirror as well, in the Daily Mail, in Wales Online, which is the local newspaper. It's probably true. I'm inclined to believe most of it. Maybe I was dragged by the hair and the police just issued a caution for that. Maybe that's a little bit hard to believe, but most of it I'm inclined to believe it is true. Now,
Yep.
What I'm going to say is a bit politically incorrect, but still, this whole thing would not have happened had Britain had a little bit more sane laws. For instance, even if the allegations were entirely true, this would not be a crime in Italy or in Spain or in Austria. I just have to keep on hammering these points. Putting people in house arrest for an entire year and things of that nature, just because a 15-year-old said that you sent them a naked picture of yourself? Are we fucking serious? Am I the only one who thinks this is utterly retarded, the way the authorities dealt with the case? I don't think this should be a crime to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, at least as far as I understand it, that this boy's story was that he had slept with her consensually.
Yeah, again, let's presume that's true. I don't think it should be a crime. It's not a crime in most of Europe. And even where it is, there is a lot of factors taken into consideration. That's definitely not going to have the quote-unquote perpetrator sitting in house arrest for 12 months just because potato.
Yeah, though to be fair, they at least as far as she says in the article, that the police told her that if she just pled guilty, she would just go in the sex offender registry and but you're not really facing any time in jail.
Yeah, so. Yes, but that's perverse incentives.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, if you're going to admit for something that you did not do, you're going to get a better treatment than if wrongfully convicted. That's the kind of perverse incentive that I don't want to be generalized, and thankfully it will not be generalized because the civil law, the antiquated Roman-style civil law system that we have in continental Europe, isn't really prone to these kinds of nonsense. At least we have that, thank goodness. On the other hand, you can get a very asshole judge, and that's a problem. But, I mean, I feel for this lady, but on the other hand, I have to take the broader context here. This is newsworthy because the victim is a woman. How many men have been through these kinds of things? Certainly a lot more. Certainly a lot more.
Certainly the case. That we have, of course, covered on the show several stories like that where the victim was a man.
Mm-hmm. And there was I think we covered on this show last time when we had something like this. A man was killed in his own house by the community for an allegation of allegedly raping a 12-year-old or something like that, which was proved post-mortem that it did not happen. I don't know. And it seems that, and again, I'm going to be accused of being very, very politically incorrect in here, but even by this show's standards. But I see a common pattern in these cases. They all come from English-speaking places.
Yeah, there's definitely something to that, that the Anglo-Saxon world tends to be a bit more, I guess, you might say, prudish when it comes to sex, and
when it comes to teen sex in particular.
In particular, that where the age of consent, basically in all the English-speaking countries, is basically 16 or higher.
Or higher, usually higher. I was reading recently a case of a 30 or 29-year-old woman who sought and received asylum in Canada. She's supposed to serve 30 years in jail in Florida, if I remember correctly, for having consensual sex with a 16-year-old boy, because the age of consent in Florida is 17.
30 years.
30 years. And I'm thinking, are you all fucking retarded? And I was reading through the comments, and like 90% were completely in approval of yeah, she should serve the time. I mean, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. It's not a crime, for crying out loud. It should not be a crime.
Yeah, I mean, in Germany, she wouldn't be sent to jail that long if she killed him.
Yeah, I was thinking exactly the same thing. I was discussing with someone yesterday the sentences in my own country. I mean, if you kill someone and it's premeditated murder, you may get 25 or 30 years, especially if the victim is a minor. But a lot of things have to happen in the case to actually get such a high sentence. You usually get 20 years for that kind of thing. 30 years for having consensual sex with a 16-year-old boy, that's retarded. And you know, this woman was eventually cleared by a jury, but she was still 1 year under effectively house arrest. For what?
Yeah, and as you said in this article, most of the comments were in support of that, and that's, I think, definitely a problem, especially in the English-speaking world, that there's just this sort of blind hatred of anyone who's even sort of arguably, possibly involved in having sex with teenagers or something. It's quite amazing how hateful people can be about this sort of thing, that people just think that this is sort of this completely special crime that people should be sent straight to hell for if that were possible.
Yes, and I'm singling out the English-speaking world not because of because I would like to see this a little bit more, I don't know, more rationally approached, because Italy is not a particularly dangerous country for teenagers, and their age of consent is 14, and there are very few people, and the very few sex offenders that do exist and have been convicted into Italy, all of them have particularly heinous crimes on their record. On the other hand, when you look at the UK or the United States sex offender registry, the overwhelming majority of them have these kinds of quote-unquote crimes, like he was 17 and she was 14, or he pissed behind the dumpster and a teenage girl saw him and was triggered by it, and therefore it's a sex offense for life. You're being singled out as a sex offender for life or for 20 years. These kinds. Why?
Yeah, because his penis was sending out light rays into her and raping him with those light rays.
I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm sounding a little bit too serious on this, and maybe I'm a bit too harsh. But seriously, why? Why this whole madness? And sadly, and I have to say this, we have within ourselves, within our non-feminist community, we have people who push for these kinds of things. Yeah, women should be punished as harsh as men for these kinds of crimes. And I'm like, no. It's a bad law, bad policy to begin with. Applying it equally bad doesn't make the situation better for anyone.
I guess this is sort of the dynamic where everyone has to be tough on crime. Is that if you oppose a harsher punishment, that means you're somehow approving of pedophilia, and that no one wants to be accused of that, so they just pile on more and more and just say we need tougher and tougher laws, and then at some point you get to a point where a woman having sex with a 16-year-old, consensual sex, gets sent to jail for 30 years.
Yeah, and Mr. R in the chat room says, well, I think a lot of people have sex before 16 anyway. Of course they do. Of course they do. But if they happen to be in an English-speaking area, they themselves or their partners run under a severe, severe legal risk because there is this total, complete, utter lack of common sense when it comes to approaching these issues. I said on this story, on this show a few months ago, or probably a year ago, there was a case in here, a 15-year-old boy got a 14-year-old girl pregnant. And the parents, the families of the two teenagers understood each other and were like, okay, we're going to help together to raise the child. The girl was very physically developed and whatnot. And at first he was arrested because the age of consent legally is 15 in here. But then the first hearing, the judge says, well, come on, no crime has actually been committed. Yeah, sure, it's a very sorry situation, but the families have already got together and solved it somehow and addressed it rationally. Why should we deprive the one of the teenagers to? And I know actually they were both beneath 15. One was 14 and 10 months, and the other was 14 and 1 month or something like that. And we're like, come on, we can't put these kids in jail. And this is insane. And the case was entirely closed. And I'm thinking, if this had happened in the United States, now that 15-year-old boy would be rotting in jail. Amazing.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, these kinds of laws are really dangerous, where you have where something is declared illegal that lots of people do, and that a lot of people don't believe is wrong. And if that is made illegal anyway, that creates a huge problem, because then this kind of law can then be selectively enforced. You can
is selectively enforced.
Is necessarily selectively enforced, really. Then you can target particular groups that you don't like. You can target particular unpopular minorities and so on. It's always really, really dangerous. Just like with the various kinds of drug prohibition and so on. You have these essentially victimless crimes where where people don't believe they're wrong, so they engage in them, and most people, of course, get away with it because you can't put everyone in jail. But some people do. Some people do get, I guess, caught or prosecuted, and it really sort of undermines this idea of the rule of law, that you have this sort of one set of rules for everyone, and it sort of very much decreases people's respect for the law, because people can see for themselves that these laws don't make any sense. So it's no big deal to break laws, and
although I'm sorry to interrupt. Although again, that's my problem is in the English-speaking world, people don't see that these laws make any sense. On the contrary, they're approving of these kinds of prosecutions, and that's my problem.
No, I'm not saying that everyone sees it like that, but the people actually involved who are actually having
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yes, they don't believe that they're doing anything wrong.
Absolutely, yes. Although again, you can argue that the serial killer doesn't believe he's doing anything wrong sometimes and whatnot. But
serial killers, that's not a victimless crime. That's not everyone who's involved thinks that's all right. His victims don't particularly want to be killed.
Absolutely.
Whereas with the teenage sex or with drugs or whatever, everyone involved doesn't really suffer from that.
Yes, absolutely.
Or at least doesn't think they suffer from that.
Yeah, and now that we addressed the sex part, let's take this picture part as well. I don't think, have we ever talked about these so-called child porn laws that eventually end up punishing most of the cases are punishing essentially horny teenagers.
Yeah, these really stupid ideas like where you're not allowed to take a photo of yourself because then you're engaging in child pornography if
Yes.
you're a teenager, and then you're I don't know, pornographized yourself or something.
Yeah,
Completely insane.
not to mention that, it's, for instance, in this case, this woman was accused of sending to this particular individual, this 15-year-old, of sending him a picture of herself naked. Now, nobody could ever prove that that happened, but let's assume it did happen. I'm still not convinced that should be a crime, because on the other hand, you can access literally millions upon millions of similar images or better in what, half a second? How much it takes to do a Google search?
Yeah, I mean, this woman is 44 and she's probably not some sort of supermodel.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely find a million pictures better in half a second. And why should this be such a horrible crime, or why should it be a crime to begin with?
No, I definitely think that you shouldn't send people unsolicited naked pictures, but I don't think you should go to jail for that. I mean,
yeah, but a sex offense? No, I agree you shouldn't. But a sex offense for a few years or 4 years in jail? Come on.
Yeah, maybe the law should get involved if that's a repeated thing. If she's constantly sending him these naked pictures and so on. That's of course that's harassment. Okay, that
sounds more sensible. Yes.
Maybe you shouldn't go to jail several years for that, but there should be some sort of punishment for that.
Now that sounds sensible, but then again, we don't see this kind of sensible dialogue, and that's really sad. It still stays on my head, that case of a 17-year-old boy from South Carolina, if I remember correctly, who risks 10 years in jail for possessing child porn. He has 2 videos of himself and a few photos of himself of his own phone. And since the age of consent is 18 in South Carolina, everything that he has ever done and the police was able to discover is entirely illegal and falls under the statutes of their harsh sex laws. Am I the only one who thinks this is wrong?
Yeah, that's completely insane. Like, I can see laws against child pornography for the purpose of preventing children from being harmed through being forced to participate in child pornography. That
makes absolute sense. Yes.
That is a sensible reason to oppose child pornography. However, the way it seems to be in the minds of a lot of people is that looking at child pornography is disgusting, evil, wrong, and therefore we must punish people for that. Even if
go ahead.
Like even if no one is being harmed, like this person has a picture of himself. Like, no one is harmed there, or like the child pornography laws in Germany also make it, for example, illegal if you have your pornography with actors who look like they're underage, or who
seriously have that in Germany too? I thought only Australia is that insane.
Yeah, also like animated pornography of children is also illegal.
That one I know is quite generalized, but this one with they look like minors, I thought only Australia had that. Which essentially the Australian law on that sounds pretty much like that essentially banned Japanese porn. That's the de facto result of it. And again, or for instance, if I were to take the law of any U.S. state and apply it to my country, anyone over the age of 25, maybe 30, is one way or the other either a victim or a perpetrator of child porn. I have a picture of myself taken by my parents, of course, when I was like, I don't know, maybe 2 months old or 3 months old, and I was naked, of course. Now, according to some laws in some places on this planet, my parents are guilty of producing child porn and distribution because they sent a copy of that photo to my grandma. So, yeah, there you go, distribution.
Yeah, they definitely should spend at least 20 years in jail.
I'm not sure my parents would live for another 20 years, but I mean, Jesus Christ. Okay, I think that we've covered more than enough on this particular issue. Let's go to the next and I think the last one, which is also an exceptional case. This time probably even more exceptional than the one previously analyzed on The Sun. Coming from the Telegraph. Oxford student activist victims claim she raped them. 2 women allegedly sexually assaulted by an Oxford University student activist have accused her of rape and said she had tried to paint herself as the victim to gain sympathy. Ani Teriba, 20, last week published an online statement admitting that had failed to establish consent during sex with someone she met at the National Union of Students NYS Black Students Conference, whatever. She admitted that she had inappropriately touched someone on a previous occasion and apologized for her actions. But her apparent victims have claimed that the mea culpa was less than forthcoming and was only released after they confronted Ms. Teriba. They said Ms. Teriba, the student union's lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transsexual women's representative, was a liar and claimed, let's be clear, Ani Teriba is a rapist. The online statement published on Tumblr, of course, went on, quote, "We find it particularly ironic that she has been a prominent voice against the very actions she herself has committed," end quote. They said the confessional statement she released on October 9 was by no means the first statement she wrote. It took approximately 3 weeks for the statement to be finally released, which shows Annie has been hell-bent on dragging out this ordeal for us, they added. She literally did blame it on the alcohol and also tried to paint herself as the victim in an effort to garner sympathy. They also claimed Ms. Teriba had been reluctant to use the word rape in her statement because of the potential legal implications. Ms. Teriba from Woolwich, southeast London, wrote in a Facebook post, which has since been deleted, quote, "At this year's NUS Black Students Conference, I had sex with someone. The other party later informed me that the sex was not consensual. I failed to properly establish consent before every act. I apologize sincerely and profoundly for my actions. In a separate incident in my first year of university, I was alerted to my inappropriate behavior whilst drunk in a club where I had touched someone in a sexual manner without their consent. Therefore, this is not an isolated incident. I apologize sincerely and profoundly for my actions. With these actions, I have rightly lost the trust of those who I organize with and fully intend to work to ensure that I both put my politics into practice in my personal relations and to prove to them that I'm committed to transformation. As such, it would be wrong of me to accept platforms and access spaces until I have done so." Thames Valley Police declined to say if they were investigating any allegation of rape or sexual assault by Ms. Teriba. Ms. Teriba could not be reached for further comment. Oxford University declined to comment. Well, well, well.
Indeed.
So let's read this again. The student union's black, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transsexual women's representative is a rapist, according to the progressive definition, of course, because we don't know if she is indeed a rapist. I suspect she may not, but I could be wrong. But, you know, by Tumblr definition, she definitely is a uber rapist. So that's all that matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's always sort of amazing, this sort of idea that you could just sort of accidentally rape someone and you just learn about it the next day. It's really interesting.
You know, and this, you know, the reason I included this piece of news in the news segment is precisely in line with the title. That moment when the Orwellian nature of feminists to redefine words until they no longer mean anything comes home to roost, because it bites precisely the type of progressive activist that bites her from her ass.
What I was actually sort of struck by was how sort of reasonable and the words of this person, this Miss Teriba, was her statement sort of reads very mature. She's accepting responsibility for what she did and so on. It seemed very reasonable, and but of course, it's never going to be good enough for the Tumblr mob.
Well, absolutely. I mean, as we know from our experiences, long-time experiences, come on, we're veterans now. As we know from our long-time experience with the special snowflake community, it's never good enough.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
If it's basically always a mistake to apologize to these kinds of people, because
yes.
they just see that as weakness. It's
yes.
And no matter how groveling your apology, they're always going to find some sort of flaw with it.
Yes, I'm still trying to think whether there is an expression in English to convey this. Give them an inch and they'll take a mile, I guess would be quite appropriate as an English translation for the more un-PC dictons that exist in Russian and Romanian and Hungarian and whatever. Yeah, I mean, yeah, agreeing with them even on a minor point and apologizing for that is bad. I mean, even if they're correct, just oppose them, tell them to fuck off. That sounds like the better strategy.
Yeah, and it's always interesting how quickly they're willing to eat their own.
I was reading today a blog post of a former social justice warrior who was like, he was writing his post to social justice warriors and was trying to explain to them, look, you cannot be an ally in the social justice warrior community. You just cannot, because no matter how good you are, the slightest transgression, the slightest deviation from the official orthodoxy, which always changes, as with Orwellian feminism, with the slightest transgression, the slightest deviation from the official orthodoxy, whatever that may be today, is enough to get you on the other end of the stick.
Yeah, and also this sort of idea that it's never good enough. No matter how much you do, it's always, if you're doing everything perfect, that's just sort of barely adequate, and basically you're still a sinner because of your privilege. See, basically, sort of just is like a Protestantism except with the grace of God. It's like you're born a wretched sinner, and God also doesn't forgive you.
No, yeah, pretty much.
Where sort of in Catholicism, there's this idea that if you do good works and if you do penance and so on, then you can sort of be a good person, and then you can sort of be basically forgiven for your sins, and
you have a chance to elevate yourself.
Have a pure soul. In Protestantism, that doesn't really work, but at least there you have the grace of God. If you trust in Jesus, He will forgive you your sins and so on. But here you don't have that. It's just you're just a wretched sinner, and you will die a wretched sinner, and there's nothing you can do about it, basically.
Yeah, the SJW religion,
really soul crushing, and
yes,
it's just so anti-human, frankly.
Yes, because you're right with the soul-crushing description. I mean, the SJW religion has no way whatsoever to deliver any equivalent of what we would call salvation, I guess. There's no way to elevate an individual from that perceived wrong, whether it's privilege or whatever. Doesn't really matter. Whatever the perceived innate wrong, there is no way to elevate ones from that.
Yeah, and if you have the sort of doctrine of original sin, or in the social justice terms, the privilege you have, then for that to be any sort of a reasonable thing you can live with, you have to have some way of atoning for that, of getting rid of that. But that doesn't seem to exist, because there aren't any cookies for good allies.
Yeah, and what I'm also thinking, Mr. R tells us that women can't legally rape in the United Kingdom, and that's true. There is a separate crime called sexual assault, which, at least in theory, implies the same punishments, but it's called differently because potato, whatever. I'm still curious whether there will be a legal investigation on this, because in this particular case, the SJWs are in a way correct. In her statement, she says, "Oh, I failed to establish consent." Well, I'm sorry, but this is rape. By her own words.
Is it current English law or British law that you have to actively establish consent?
No, it's not. They haven't gone full yes means yes, not yet anyway, although I do expect they'll try. Although probably the next administration, the current Conservative administration, doesn't look like the one to gather enough coalition to actually pass such thing. Cameron may be a wimp, but the entire party is not formed of these kinds of ideologues. So I don't think it will happen until maybe after the next elections. Although with Jeremy Corbyn, I don't think.
Yeah, that seems rather unlikely.
Yeah, so no, they don't have yes means yes, and I suspect they won't have anytime soon.
Yeah, so she's not officially a rapist if her story sort of is true.
Yeah.
If of course there's always the possibility that she was sort of phrasing this in a very weaselly way, and she actually raped this person. That's of course possible. We don't know.
That's of course possible. What I find particularly funny is the SJWs trying to accuse her that she tries to paint herself as the victim. Well, that's true, but on the other hand, it's what an SJW does. Show me an SJW that doesn't look for new ways to paint herself, because there are, male SJWs are a problem anyway. So show me an SJW that doesn't try to paint herself as a victim.
Yourself is the correct term.
Or self, yeah. Or toddler self. No, in all seriousness, show me an SJW that doesn't try to portray herself as a victim. I don't think such thing.
I don't really think she was doing that in this statement.
Yeah, probably. I don't know.
It seemed to me that she was sort of taking responsibility for her actions. I don't think she was painting herself as a victim.
Yeah, I'm gonna drop in the chat room a link to her entire statement if anyone is curious in finding more gems in it. The Guardian published it in its entirety. Of course, The Guardian published it in its entirety. Yeah, I mean, she did say, "Oh well, I'm only that when I drink or whatnot," which does incline us to believe that she was blaming alcohol in part. But on the other hand, well, drinking alcohol is a choice, and I have a friend who is very violent when he drinks. Therefore, he drinks very little because he knows that he's going full retard when he drinks. So he avoids drinking too much. Is it really that hard to demand to other people that, if you know you're doing retarded stuff when you're drunk, just don't get drunk? Or get drunk by yourself when you can't harm other people? Yeah. Is it really that hard?
It shouldn't be.
I mean, I only say very dirty and un-PC jokes when I'm drunk, so I'm safe to drink as much as I please. But other people become quite violent or whatever. They do much more retarded stuff than just saying very, very dirty jokes when drunk. So, I mean, and I don't know. The whole thing is funny in a way, and on the other hand, it pretty much shows the state of it, because if we want to go full agitprop on this particular case, we can go and they say, why is there such thing as an NUS Black Students Conference? I thought segregation is bad. I'm not saying it shouldn't exist. In my opinion, any form of voluntary segregation should be absolutely legal, and people should associate one however they please. But in the progressive context, having a Black Students Conference is, or should be, transgressive?
Yeah, but I mean, they're a historically marginalized group, and they're still marginalized today, so therefore it's okay.
Okay, but the only difference in practice is that the NUS Black Students Conference was in the past mandated by law. Actually, I don't think they did have this kind of segregation in the UK. But in the past was more socially mandated, whilst now it's still socially mandated, but by other groups of people. It's a very irrelevant difference. The outcome is identical, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't say it made sense.
Yeah, CYR says in the chat room, well, maybe what she did was she didn't ask every 5 minutes, you want to fuck? Maybe. I haven't looked into what the sexual assault policies are within Oxford. Maybe they have a yes means yes type of policy. And I would not be surprised if they did, given that also from Oxford comes that other student who rejected publicly in the media to go into consent classes.
Yeah, I'm just sort of imagining how this sort of sex looks like when you're asking consent all the time, you know. May I squeeze your left breast? May I squeeze your right breast now? May I continue squeezing it?
Yeah, by that standard, the human species would have never reproduced. Seriously, I'm not joking. By that standard, screw the reproduction. There would be no reproduction whatsoever. Only in I don't know, rural right-wing bigoted communities where they ignore what the elites are telling them. I guess that would be the only place where reproduction would still occur.
Maybe that actually has happened, except those progressive communities have just died out from natural selection.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm going to keep an eye on this case and see how it's going to be developed in the future. If there will be any development, maybe they'll just bury it because it's way too counter narrative. Having it discussed on the front page of a bigoted right-wing newspaper, because the Telegraph, let's not forget, it's the oppressor here. Having this discussed in the pages of such a newspaper is. And I can see SJWs thinking like that, it's harming the cause.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've spent quite enough time on the air. Personally, I don't have any further remarks on this.
Neither do I. Except one remark, which is take the red pill.
Take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone. Mr. Huff, please take us out.